Thank you very much, Stefan. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, first of all, I'm deeply grateful to the organizer, and mainly to Xandra and Stefan, for inviting me to take part in this event and for welcoming me into the board of the European Civil Justice Centre. It is a privilege to contribute to such a forward-looking initiative. It is moreover an honor to open this roundtable that is dedicated to delivering justice, challenges and opportunities in practice. We gather at a moment in which civil justice in Europe is being reshaped by powerful forces of different kinds, not only legal but also technological, institutional and social. Over the last decade, as we heard also from the distinguished speaker we had the opportunity to have before, access to justice has undergone a conceptual and doctrinal advancement. Article 47, it was mentioned by Eva, of the Charter of Fundamental Rights has become a cornerstone of the European legal order, and the Court of Justice of the European Union has consistently interpreted national procedural rules and institutional arrangements throughout the lens of effective judicial protection. This case law emphasizes that access to justice must be practical and effective, requiring courts, procedures, remedies and enforcement systems capable of guaranteeing real and not merely theoretical redress. Parallel to this judicial evolution, a rich body of European scholarship emerged. Many of them are here with us. Xandra, Burkades, Stefan, Alan, Eva, and so on, and many others. And they have examined how civil justice systems must evolve to remain effective, fair and resilient in contemporary societies. First of all, I just express my thanks to the organizers and to the co-directors of the European Civil Justice Centre, and I just said that it is really an honor to open this roundtable that is dedicated to challenges and opportunities in practice delivering justice. As I said before, we gather at a moment in which civil justice in Europe is being reshaped by powerful forces, and I deem that there are three structural transformations that provide the conceptual backdrop for our discussion today. First of all, the digitalization of civil justice. Across Europe, courts are transitioning from paper-based to digital by default systems, so e-filing, digital communication, and so on. Digitalization promises efficiency, accessibility, and transparency, but it also raises profound questions regarding fairness, regarding equality of arms, and so on. Second, the expansion of collective enforcement and alternative dispute resolution mechanism, particularly in areas such as consumer protection. The Representative Action Directive and the new 2025 ADR Directive reflect a systemic shift. Access to justice is no longer seen only as access to courts, but as a broader ecosystem of complementary pathways for redress. Then third, the transformation of the legal service market. Empirical research shows that how rights are enforced depends heavily on the organization of legal services, the structure of law firms, the availability of unbundled legal services, the uptake of legal tech, and so on. Within this landscape, I deem that the three perspectives represented on our panel are extraordinarily valuable and complementary. None of our panelists truly needs my introduction, but I have the honor to briefly present them and their perspective today. Alexandre Biard, Head of Consumer Redress and Enforcement at BEUC and guest researcher at Erasmus School of Law, brings the voice of consumers and consumer organizations. His academic and policy work focuses on consumer dispute resolution, collective redress, and the effectiveness of enforcement mechanisms across the EU. He has authored influential analysis on ADR-ODR systems and must-harm redress, examining the persistent gap between formal consumer rights and practical access to justice. Paulien van den Grinten He's a senior legislative lawyer at the Dutch Ministry of Justice and Security, working in private law, civil justice, and private international law area. She has been closely involved in the development of Dutch collective redress legislation and the EU negotiation on international civil procedure and directive on representative actions. Drawing on her earlier experience as a litigation lawyer in private practice, she combines legislative expertise with a strong awareness of practical enforcement and access to justice issues. She perfectly reflects the perspective of the policymaker and the legislator. David Markworth, I hope the surname was correctly pronounced, is a professor at the University of Cologne, specializing in civil procedure, legal services markets, and the organization of legal services. His empirical research examines how law firms structure their services, how legal tech and regulatory reforms shape the delivery of legal assistance, and how market incentives influence access to justice. He has published widely on the evolution of legal services, and he can certainly offer a data-driven perspective on innovation in the legal profession. Finally, our discussant, Cristiaan Stokkermans, Professor of Company and Financial Law at the hosting university, Erasmus School of Law. He combines an academic focus on corporate governance, legal market structures, and professional regulation with extensive practical experience. Before joining academia, he practiced as a lawyer and served as a deputy judge at the Amsterdam Court of Appeal. His recent research explores alternative business structures for lawyers, the organization of legal services, and the evolving role of legal professionals in modern justice systems. To guide our discussion, at the very beginning I was thinking to divide our discussion with two questions, one on challenges and one on opportunities, but actually due to the format, due to the hybrid format, I think it's much better to mix the two questions that I will address to all the speakers. First, what are the principal challenges in delivering access to justice today across enforcement, procedure, and the legal service ecosystems? Second, which opportunities through digital innovation, collective mechanism, and institutional design can realistically be harnessed to ensure that justice is not merely proclaimed, but concretely delivered? Let us begin with the challenges and the opportunities with respect to the consumer's perspectives. Alexandre Biard, if you want, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and congratulations for the launch of the center. It's a timely, very important initiative, and the fact that you invited stakeholders like BEUC means that you really want to cooperate with the outside world beyond academia, and I think it's very important. I will explain why. Just for those of you who don't know what BEUC is, we are the umbrella consumer organization based in Brussels. We have nearly 40 members. In the Netherlands, it's Consumentenbond, our key member. And we are in more than 30 countries. And we are very active on all those topics, ADR, collective redress, and to see what are the developments in the EU. On your question, Francesca, if we look at this issue as a market, the justice legal system, or justice as a market. Here I will focus on the demand side, okay, on the side of consumers, or could be also the side of all individuals. What is interesting is to see that barriers to enter this market are huge. Hercules, had to perform 12 labors. Well, I could count 12 labors, but I will focus on 4. The first one is for consumers or for plaintiffs to be aware that their rights have been infringed, to be aware that there is something going wrong, and to be able to detect that there is something going wrong. I don't know for you, but for me it's very difficult to know when I've been exposed to tracking, unfair profiling, or when my data, for example, have been used unfairly. It's nearly impossible. So imagine consumers who have, their daily life, busy life, families, and so on. I think this is their least priority, so to focus on this kind of problem. So being aware of their rights and being able to detect that something wrong is happening. This is the first issue. Second issue, okay, imagine you are aware of your rights. Now you need to prove it. And here it's another issue, huge information asymmetries that you are facing in this area compared to companies, traders, the black box effect. You know much more, much less than the company or the person in front of you, especially in the digital aspect. The third question, so imagine you are aware of your rights, you are able to detect the issue, you are able to prove it, good, well done, but then you still need to find a way, a good partner to vindicate your rights, and you should be able to know who you should turn to vindicate your rights. And here you have to swim in an ocean of information, and to find the trustworthy partners, because we have now a market for legal services with bad and good actors, For example, in the tourism aviation sectors, you have private claim management vehicles collecting claims, offering their services against a fee to consumer, whereas you have ADR providers providing exactly the same service for free. But for consumers, you don't know that it exists, so you go to the first one on your Google ranking list. So you have to navigate, find your way to find a trustworthy partner, and again in this emerging legal service market. And the fourth labor is to be patient, because it will take a huge amount of time. So this is the demand side. So you see, before entering into this legal system justice market, you have to face these issues, and only if you manage to alleviate those problems, then you will be able to meet the supply side, which is the justice system. So you see, we are not there. So this is for the dark side. Should I continue with the bright side, or okay? So I continue with the bright side. So how do we solve this issue? Personally, I really believe in cooperation, and for many different reasons. With my organization, we are trying to build, I told you several times, bridges with academia, with other civil society organizations to pool information, to pool knowledge and expertise in those areas. So we invite researchers to share their views, and I really see this center as a platform to share knowledge and expertise, to do some evidence gathering, to alleviate these asymmetries of information I mentioned before. So we need to create this space for discussion and avoid working in silos, which I think we're all trying to do to avoid working in silos, but still this is happening today. I think we are not discussing enough one with each other. So between academia, civil society, businesses, authorities, there are ways to engage, but not enough in my view. So we should have a safe space for discussion. I think the center is a perfect opportunity for that. We should do more in terms of evidence gathering, to know what is out there, to know what works, what are the best practices, what is impactful, what is meaningful. We are discussing, for example, in my organization, what does it mean deterrent sanction, or what deterrent fine or deterrent remedies on companies? Because imposing a fine sometimes is not enough, so you need to find behavioral remedies. So we need to have this discussion of what works, evidence gathering, testing also. I mean, this is a safe place to test, what is working or not, and of course also to I think it will be important to make and formulate policy recommendations. One area we see important is, in the legislation, there are areas where we should have a reversal of the burden of proof, because it's clearly too difficult, to bring a claim, to substantiate a claim. So there should be ways to alleviate this burden of proof. So these are also topics that we could discuss, how this should be done, in a fair and balanced way. So there are many things to be discussed, but I really, looking forward to this initiative, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for organizing this event and for having me on the panel. I'm very honored, and I think this new center will certainly be a worthy follow-up of all the work that's been done already in previous, the setting. Great. We've heard so many different things today that it's really hard to choose what to talk about from the policy's perspective. A few words already came to my mind when, for example, previous speakers were talking about reform at EU level, and then I thought, okay, yeah, that's where we come in as the party poopers, as member states, because we're often rather unwilling to do this. That brings me then to the challenges as to why sometimes we're so reluctant to engage in reform. If I take the example of collective redress and the need for more coordination, well, the logical thing to do would be to look at Brussels 1 piece and to say, okay, but that's clearly not catered for collective redress, so maybe we should look at possibilities to cater better for collective redress at its revision. But what we see in practice is that everyone is rather reluctant to really engage in a revision, because once opening that box, we've no idea what other issues will come up, and we don't even have any clue as to whether for collective redress we will end up with better coordination and better access to justice, or whether it will be completely reversed and you get a result which is like 180 degrees opposite of what you wanted. So that is always a difficult dilemma, really, for us in thinking about whether to push for EU legislation or whether to hold back, because you never know what's coming out. So that's for EU legislation, the challenge. And then as regards digitization, which we've talked a lot about, well, I think I'm sort of in one of the worst positions coming from the Netherlands to talk about it, because we're really not doing well at all in this. We had a failed attempt to have automated and digitized procedures from 2016 to 2019. That was really stopped because people complained so much about how it worked. Then there are a lot of pilots and voluntary schemes set up by the courts to try and digitize procedures. And once it works well voluntarily, they come to us at the ministry and tell us, please make this compulsory, not for natural persons, but for at least all the professionals. Well, we've had one of those procedures where it would mainly be the bailiffs using it, like the seizure of goods would be done by the bailiffs. And they said, well, very nice that you're working on this, but the portal that you're setting up for us to enter and the electronic identification system doesn't match with ours. So we can't be forced to do that through your portal. We have our own electronic identification system. So yeah, that you have to find a solution, but since the Netherlands have rather long ago chosen to leave a lot to private parties, to the market. The bailiffs are a market party and their system is a market system. So you can't just force them to use a government system. And then on top of that, last week it was on the news that our citizens' electronic ID system will be sold to American companies. Which would be like a crucial, I think crucial if we use that also as our court personal identification system, that we know that there's not some person somewhere in the United States saying, okay, but yeah, let's just turn it off for a while, and then nobody could communicate. So that's like the challenges we have. And then on the bright side for digitization, I think the e-justice regulation has forced all the member states, but in our case it's really, I think, an incentive to work together and have like a more common electronic system through which to communicate. And I know that Ernst has worked for a long time on the, Ernst who's here, on the e-codex system, which has now been sort of reshaped and adopted at EU level, but it forces us also to open it up more for, I think once we've opened it up for the cross-border procedures at EU level, and if that works, it will be easier to hopefully roll it out and use it for national procedures as well. And then maybe one other point about reform of national civil procedure. Well, I know someone who's very critical in the Netherlands about how we do at that, and I have to agree that it's very hard. There's so many ideas for reform to enhance access to justice, citizen-centered, but in practice it's been really hard so far to implement it, and that has to do with the historical position of stakeholders. Yeah, if you're used to be like always part of everything, well, let's say the legal profession as a whole haven't been very much change inclined, I think. They don't really like change, at least in the Netherlands. So there aren't real support groups, even at the ministry. If we think, as we are now working on, we have a project to simplify civil procedure law. But there's not a natural support group, because the stakeholders, the courts say, yeah, maybe like if we've implemented it, it might really be useful at some stage in 20 years, but now we don't have the budget, and we are already so overwhelmed by the cases we have, although there is a decline in civil procedural cases, but still it costs them a lot of time and they're complex. So yeah, do you really have to bother us with this? The lawyers are saying, yeah, but what's in it for us? They don't like the change in itself. Bailiffs fear that they might be cut out of the process. So, yeah, we're sometimes looking for what kind of group in society. I mean, citizens won't speak up for themselves to require, to demand better access to justice. And thus it's really sometimes up to individuals or to our position as a government to say, okay, it should be up to us, but we do need the help of others. So what we do is try and work together with stakeholders, and sometimes in the end we will get there. But if I see some other systems in other member states, I think they, at least at digitization and reform, they've really done better than us. So I really hope that we can learn a lot from them, and I think the center can be like really a spreading point for knowledge. And then you mentioned the ELI UNIDRA rules, and I think they could be also an inspiration for us to work from. And in that respect, yeah, I think the center can really help us also at national level to stay inspired and learn from each other, and sometimes give us a bit of a push, hopefully, to really get results. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulien, for your illuminating remarks and also on the role of the center. We now turn to the legal profession. So, David Markworth, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. So I see this launch as an event, as an opportunity to make some suggestions on what, in my opinion, it would be worthwhile to focus the center's research on. I know, the center's founders certainly don't need homework. I think they have quite a lot of ideas on their own, but I guess, why else should they have invited us? So let me hand out some homework. So what I would like to focus on, or what I would like to highlight, are the challenges when it comes to regulating legal markets with the goal of promoting access to justice. So when you look at legal markets in general, the status quo is actually quite exciting. We see a lot of innovation in the legal services sector across Europe at the moment, new actors coming in, a lot of capital coming in from different sources, and even a sort of startup culture, especially in the field of legal AI, which you probably will already all have noticed. When it comes to access to justice, there are two challenges in particular, in my opinion. And the first is access to justice really our regulatory goal when it comes to the legal services sector and legal service provision? Because at the moment it is in some places in Europe, especially in the UK, in others it's not. So there's no pan-European solution, and the traditional goal of regulating the legal profession is safeguarding the independence, mainly from the state, which I think the European Union at the moment must really focus on. It's a big goal, but access to justice is not really found there. So that's the one challenge. Is it really the regulatory goal? The other and the main challenge is coming to terms with conflicting regulatory goals there, because you have access to justice maybe as a regulatory goal, but you also have the goal of providing good legal advice, or legal advice free of conflicts of interest. So we already heard that from Alexandre, and I really like that you have a new market with good and bad actors, and you cannot really decide which ones are the good ones. Are the lawyers really the good ones? Have they ever been? We have to work on that, and to see how this fits into each other. Access to justice, promotion of access to justice, and high quality, right or useful legal advice. And then secondly, I want to highlight the need for scholars to work at the intersections between legal services regulation and procedural law and consumer law in particular. And I would be happy to give two very small examples which we can delve into further. And the first one is the rise of so-called alternative business structures, very much discussed here in the Netherlands, also at the ECJ level and in other member states such as Germany, meaning an influx of capital into legal services providers, especially from private equity. In other words, private equity at the gates of our legal services sector. And there we have Eva's question of who is left out from these new financing opportunities, and how do we include them, and who will be pushed out by this new capital. So the traditional legal services providers, for example, small law firms. And also in the end, this financialization of legal markets might mean that we end up with a mainly US-based legal services markets where all the profits are there, and the main actors are far from reach from us. The second example I want to give is AI legal advice. So many of you have already heard that from me, but I see ChatGPT mainly as like an access to justice machine, right? Especially across borders. This morning I asked ChatGPT, according to Dutch law, does my landlord have to pay for damages in my flat? And it gave me a reasonably good answer that was certainly much better than if I would have looked it up or tried to talk to a Dutch lawyer. That would have certainly taken a lot more time and cost me more, because this was, at least in theory, cost-free. And so ChatGPT and other LLMs are used for legal advice. But we all know about the hallucinations, we all know about the wrong answers, and none of that, so legal advice giving by AI, is especially mentioned in the AI Act. It's mentioned, and the AI Act deals with using AI in the court systems, in the judicial systems, but giving legal advice is not really a thing that the AI Act deals with. So these are my two examples, and the challenge for regulators now is to strike a balance here. We have a lot of potential for better access to justice through new legal services providers, but what we need, in my opinion, are two things. So for once, we have to go back to the basis and actually think about what we mean by legal services provisions, or what we mean by who is a lawyer, right? We could spend the rest of the day arguing, I think, about that, because in Europe we have very different opinions on that. And then secondly, I think, and it was already emphasized before, there's a need for more empirical research on this new legal services market, on the good and the bad actors, so that we are actually clear about, have more clearness about who we might be regulating and why not. And this, in the end, is more a need for a more law and economics perspective, I think, in this regard. And I think this is where the center will be able to help a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And now we have our discussant. I invite him, Cristiaan Stokkermans, to comment briefly on the key challenges and the opportunities emphasized by our panelists.
I've been quiet all morning, so my throat is dry. Thank you very much, Francesca. And thank you, Xandra, and Stefaan, for the opportunity to speak to you. I feel a little bit like an outsider. I've been a corporate lawyer all my life, and am very used to look at complex problems from a very practical perspective. How will you really solve problems? And a lot of the issues at stake for this center are so complex that it is really difficult to do that. So how to combine the theoretical, the practical complexity of things to actually solving problems for people. And I think Paulien mentioned a few lines in the same direction. It is very complex. So I'm a discussant. I don't know what that means. I took notes, and actually all that I heard this morning was so inspiring to me, and to the things that I heard, I'm not going to discuss and go into details. I just wanted perhaps to then raise a few questions with regard to the speeches of each of the three participants. And Alexandre is first, and so he talks from a consumer perspective. Consumers, very important, of course, but it is, in my mind, if we talk about the law, I often talk about citizens rather than consumers. The consumer side is only one thing. And this morning it was also mentioned public interest litigation, for instance, if it's in the environmental department. Many people are concerned with their access to justice in that respect. And I wrote a note myself under the decision of the Court of Appeals in The Hague in the Shell case. So this is, their carbon emissions versus the need to reduce them. And the interest of many people to actually do that in the interest of the environment. And one of the things that struck me there was that the Court of Appeals said, well, Milieudefensie, so that's the public interest organization, the NGO starting the procedure, they can act on behalf of the Dutch people, but they do not have a right to act on behalf of all peoples in Europe, let alone all people of the world. And I think this issue of standing in international cases like that, and then more generally the issue of ordinary citizens to come up for public interest things, not necessarily only their personal interest, is very important in terms of the access to justice. Now, a second thing, completely different nature. If you look at consumers, you indicated, Alexandre, the demand side, so you're acting for the consumers, but then in the research that I have done and that Xandra and I are doing, we're also looking at the offer side, so the regulation governing regulated lawyers. Will that be helpful for access to justice? What you now see in the Netherlands is that, you have the magic circle, big law firms, big corporations, then you have a slice of, big slice of legal aid, financed, subsidized by the government, and then you have this huge market of ordinary people and small business owners, and give them access to justice. On the supply side, that market is greatly dominated by very, very small law firms. Does that make sense? You would expect like supermarkets or so, for this huge consumer market. That is virtually not existing. In the Netherlands, we have one big exemption, and that's the legal assistance insurance. We have almost 18 million people living in the Netherlands, and we have more than 2.5 million families that took out legal assistance insurance. So this is really huge. And under the rules, law firms may only owned by lawyers because, somehow they should be the best to do that, and their independence is important. But there is a huge exemption that in the Netherlands, legal assistance insurers may have in-house lawyers that can also work for the insured. And that's very exceptional in terms of rules in Europe, but it seems to work well. Policies are affordable, all sort of quality standards in place, and business cases being met. And we even go one step further, that on an experimental basis, these in-house lawyers of legal assistance insurers may also act for the non-insured. They call it the on-demand market. As a customer, you go on demand. Well, I'm not insured, but can you still help me? Because, your quality label, it appeals to me, and can you do that? So these are issues, I think, also opportunities for the center to take on, and we already made a start on that. Then briefly for Paulien, the judicial systems. You raised the issue of bailiffs being afraid of, their jobs, their commercial interests, if we take out the current procedures, and also the regulated lawyers. So let's say the Bar Association. What Paulien said appeals to me. It's also what I observed. There is some sort of a conservatism. There is some sort of a fear of change. There is vested interests. And then there is this huge professionality, because although they may be kind of narrow-minded in their acts, so many lawyers, we all know, are there to help with their professional expertise to improve things. Now, it struck me in our law, the law on regulated lawyers, so to speak, advocatenwet, and then if you look at what's the mission, the purpose, why should they do what they do for the Bar Association. Now, the Bar Association actually, if you just look at the law, is there to protect the interests of the regulated lawyers, their independence, their professional standards. And actually there is very, very little in there about, as a important systemic player, take responsibility with all their knowledge for, advancing broader goals. And Ellen, you talked about the Brexit, and unfortunately, we don't have the pragmatic approach of the British anymore. The Danish, the Dutch, we try to take over, but it's not entirely that. But we can still go there and learn. And in Article 1 of the Legal Services Act 2007, they got a list of regulatory objectives that are the objectives of the law, but then also, transpires to all the players need to work with that. And access to lawyers, consumer rights, broader public interest, but also a healthy sector where it's nice to work, where people can earn their living, and diversity also. In that sector, very, very important. And I think that helping these professional organizations like the Bar Association, with actually changing their attitude. Yes, we are here also for the broader interest. They do a lot of that, but can be more focused and better. That would help. Now then, two points, perhaps quickly on David's points. One is going in the same direction. If you look at the English Legal Services Act, it also takes away some of the powers from the Bar Association and similar institutions to say rules about the market, who has access to the market on the supply side, and all of that should not be in the hands of the legal profession itself. Should be not also the Ministry of Justice, too close to politics, but it's some independent regulator. And I think that is an important thought too. Actually, there is a European directive requiring that, but in the Netherlands we're not quite living up to that. But that independency is important. And then third, or last, I must say, will it be helpful to actually, guided by these broader regulatory purposes, objectives, would it be helpful to meet those, to admit private equity or other outside financiers to hold capital in law firms? It's a very difficult question because it can have opportunities and challenges alike. But I'm not excluding that. What I do also recognize, based on international research, is that, for instance, in Germany, it's now much more easy to have combined firms offering both legal and, for instance, medical advice. Legal and construction advice, merging with architects and builders to look at the world from a more integrated perspective. So I think exploring venues like that, so that the actual demand on the consumer or citizen side matches better with opportunities where to go to get integrated advice for real problems that can be bigger than mere legal problems, is appealing to me as well. More to say, but I'll leave it to that, Francesca.
Thank you, Cristiaan. I need this one.
Thank you very much for that. We are running a little bit late, so I will be very, very short. I took some notes, some ideas, and they are called, I don't know what the term in English is, in Dutch it's called losse vlodders, but some ideas that I think could be of interest for us. First of all, thank you so much, Alan, for your keynote speech. I think, first of all, you really set the stage by pointing out, I think, a number of weaknesses that we're going from trust to mistrust, harmonization to unused EU civil justice instruments. But I'm very happy that at the end of your talk you turned these weaknesses into opportunities, and I think we should grasp that opportunity to look at those opportunities. You talked about putting the emphasis more on empirical civil procedure, on cooperation, evidence gathering, policy recommendations, etc. And then in the following panels and in the following talks, I took note of what I called 7 construction sites that I basically took note of. First of all, and I refer to what Eva said, and I very much like that, this is something that has been very dear to my heart, also in other things that I have written, is the coordination of policy areas. I think it's very important sometimes that people are so embedded in their world, and sometimes I think it is important sometimes to take a step back and look a little bit at the broader framework and look also at other dispute resolution avenues. And I'm very glad that you talked about ADR, you talked about regulatory redress, you talked about public enforcement. So I think connecting those dots and looking at more opportunities for interaction and interconnection seems to me very, very important. The second one, what Magdalena referred to, global justice system, fundamental rights becoming transnational. I think this is a very interesting and challenging development, and I think we also should take that into account. Thirdly, generative artificial intelligence, which I think is unstoppable. I think some people in the room were, and I'm not that old, but I'm getting a little bit older, artificial intelligence, when I went to university, this was something that absolutely was inexistent. Now in Leuven, we have a mandatory course for our students to talk about artificial intelligence, digitalization. It's not an optional course, it's even a mandatory course. So this emphasizes, I think, the importance, because these students who will graduate in a number of years, that will be their world. The fourth construction site, and I refer to what Burkhardt said, is the reform Brussels 1bis regulation, cross-border issues. I think this remains a very important issue. It's one of the cornerstones of European civil procedure. Fifth, digitalization of civil justice goes maybe hand in hand with generative artificial intelligence, but I think it's still a little bit different, and I refer to what Francesca has said in her panel and her panelists. Collective redress and ADR, maybe the sixth, construction side. These are things that still on the European level remain very important. The Representative Actions Directive is now in place. We have seen it implemented in most EU member states. I think there are still one or two that still have to implement it. It leads to a lot of challenges. For example, third-party litigation funding, I think, is important. And on the other hand, there is the revision of the Consumer ADR Directive. There is now a compromise text. But then we will also see now the discussion starting with the revision of the CPC regulation, which will also be, I think, something to be followed. And finally, and there I refer to what, for example, David has mentioned, and also in the last panel, is the transformation of the legal market and legal services, which I think is also unstoppable, and also the role that other actors can play in civil justice systems. I think this is very briefly, Xandra, what I have noted. So once again, also on my behalf, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, who are here in the room and also online, to come here and to be here present at our event. And I'm pretty sure that there will be other events also and other projects, and then we are more than happy to be in touch about that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefaan, for this very nice quick wrap-up, and also to catch up a little bit on the time. So it's for me to fully close the meeting now, but of course saying a little bit more about what we envisage with the center. It's also on our website, so you can also take a look at that. And what we want, or what also in the previous projects we have seen or have taken as a guideline, is to foster access to justice, what I call in a tailor-made jacket, because different types of disputes and different types of groups of people, individuals or collectively, need different types of, or may need different types of dispute resolution, and may also need, in the before coming to litigation or other means of dispute resolution, may need other types of legal services, and that is was also emphasized today. So this is why we take a broad approach in not only looking, for instance, at consumers or individuals or businesses, but we try to look at different perspectives and different angles. Good. So our vision is to create a hub, a network, because we're partially, or some of us are present here in Rotterdam. Of course, our audience today, but working at Erasmus School of Law is a small group of people, but we see the center, and also in collaboration with KU Leuven and the University of Bergen and many others, as a network hub. And a lot of work will be done remotely. We will, of course, also try to have some live events here or in other places, maybe also in Leuven, but we see this center as a network hub where we can combine knowledge, where we can share knowledge, and that is, of course, with the aim of increasing access to justice. And our key areas and activities, and we've listed them here at the website: public interest and collective action, so general litigation, but then looking at the public interest side of litigation and not only individual interest, legal aid and assistance in the broad sense. It's about legal funding, but it's also about the whole legal services market, supply and demand side, as we have emphasized. Then digitalization of justice in the broad sense, still getting our procedures online, as we also try today, also with a couple of technical hiccups, and that is something that also courts and other service providers are struggling with. And of course, artificial intelligence will also be part of our work, being part also of the digital movement. ADR and ODR, different forms of ADR and ODR that are very important to increase access to justice, because we all realize not everything has to end up in courts. And also, that has been one of my recent research areas as well, and is also clearly on the agenda of the European Commission litigation, and this is SLAPS, because we've talked a lot about strategic litigation, for instance, climate litigation or consumer litigation. But SLAPS litigation is an anti-strategic movement in terms of, well, it's also strategic, but then strategically meant to silence, for instance, journalists, media, researchers, etc., and NGOs. So also that is a perspective that we will be looking at. And what we envisage is to have joint research projects. So everyone who wants to join the center, we can more easily then contact people to say, hey, there is a joint research project, and would you like to be involved in that? Policy-oriented research. Of course, we are also in contact and have all been working with the European Commission, very important for cross-border litigation, but also a ripple-down effect to reforming national justice systems. Training is important, and then we can also do that in combination with, or in collaboration with, for instance, BUIC, the consumer organization, and really having an impact on what happens on the ground, so different stakeholders. What we also find important, because, well, we are more or less established researchers, I could say, at least Stefaan and I, and the others involved in setting up this center and the advisory board, but we also want to involve early research, early career researchers that are struggling to start a PhD, doing a PhD, wrapping up a PhD, and also, of course, after the PhD, maybe pursuing an academic career or having another career, but still linking to academics. Also, that is what we find very important, and then this research center can also play a role in that. Of course, also in our other events, we always try to not only look at our own peers and people that we've known because we grew up with them academically, but also look at the younger generation, because they are, of course, the future. So we very much want to involve them as well. And sometimes, especially when it comes, for instance, to AI research, and oh, wow, I didn't know that, that's really something new for me. So we also really learn from the younger generations that have, that grew up in a different time. So becoming a fellow, it's not an official thing, and we don't have high standards. Oh, you have to qualify and need 3 applications and referees. Just contact us, and if you say, hey, I think I would like to be involved in some of the activities, I would like to be reachable more easily, then send us a message and say, well, I'm either more senior, or I am more junior, or I want to just be an associated because I'm not really an academic researcher, but I am from legal practice but would like to be involved. So we have different categories. You can see that on our website, and then we can include you on the list, and then of course we can more easily contact you also when we have events that you would like to organize. So I think that is what I wanted to say about the center, and I hope I haven't forgotten things. No, we've been talking long enough. Thank you very much for everyone, to everyone for being here in the room. I'm very happy that many people came, and also from different areas and different sectors. I'm very happy with that. Also very happy with, we had many people that wanted to join online. Of course, not everyone can in the end, but we had quite a good turnout also for the online. We know that there were some technical hiccups. We try to always be very secure and everything, make the link available only last minute, but well, the last minute is enough also for hackers sometimes to jump in and make abuse of what we are trying to do. So apologize for that. That is also a part of life. Thank you very much to everyone, and of course Stefaan in particular for being a co-director of the center, and we hope to be in touch in whatever form, digitally or live soon. Thank you.